So we're moving on to dividing decimals. With dividing decimals, there's a couple of important rules to remember. You need to move the decimal point over, and to start with, that's just to make the problem a little bit easier to understand. And then anchor the decimal point, and then just do regular division. So these are division problems here. We'll change it, make sure that this is clear. So these are two division problems here. And as an example of what I'm talking about here, 0.54 divided by 0.72. And that means how many times does this number go into that number? And so let's see, to start with, we just go ahead and get right out the problem. 0.54 divided by 0.72. And first thing we do is move the decimal point over. And the reason why we can do this is we're moving it over like this, is I can multiply this number by 10, or in this case 100, as long as I multiply this number by this same amount, by 10 and then 100, because it will still divide in the same amount of times if I multiply both numbers by 10 or 100. So now I'm just going to rewrite the problem. 72, how many times does 72 go into 54? And that decimal point, remember, is at the end right there. And so how many times does 72 go into 5? It goes into 0 times. How many does 72 go into 54? It goes into 0 times. So how many times does we now go ahead and realize that we need to move on and say, well, we need some extra numbers here. So what we do is we annex zeros. And that just simply means we're putting some zeros over here. Put as many as we want. So this just simply means I have 0 tenths. I have 0 hundredths. You can add as many as you need. So how many times does 72 go into 540? Remember, we're ignoring this right now because we're just paying attention to the full number there. 72 goes, so let's try 7 to start with. Because all I'm doing is I'm estimating, well, this is about 540, this is about 70. So how many times does it go in? If I know my multiplication tables, that's what's 54 divided by 7, or how many times does 7 go into 54? Well, it goes into 49, I know that, not 54, but that's pretty close. So how many times does it, so now I go ahead and multiply this out. 7 times 2 is going to be 14. 7 times 7, 49, plus 1 is going to be 50. And I now subtract this. 0 minus 4 is going to be, well, I can't do that, can I? So I need to change this. I need to borrow some numbers here. So now this is going to be a 3. And this is going to be a 10. And so how many times do, what happens when I subtract 4 from 10? That's going to be 6. Now I've got 3 minus 0. That's going to be 3. 5 minus 5, 0. So now I've got that. That's the right number because, well, 72 doesn't go into 36. So I know I got it right. So now I bring down this next 0. And I say to myself, well, how many times, what would I guess for something, how many times does 72 go into 360? Well, I'd say, well, how many times does 70 go into 360? And I know that, well, and then I'd move that from 7 into 36, and I know it goes into 35. 7 goes into 35 5 times, so that's why I choose 5. 5, well, let's get rid of that because that's a little bit confusing. We don't want to think we've got that still over there. 5 times 2 is going to be 10. 5 times 7, 35, 36. So 0, and I got my answer here, 0.75. And let's see if that's reasonable. So this here is close to 1 divided by close to 1. That's going to give us 1. If we look here, see that that's a pretty close answer. Now, the problem with all this is a lot of people, they don't want to use paper and to figure this out in the steps, and that's a surefire way of making careless errors. So please, paper is cheap. Remember that. So now this next problem here, 224.5 divided by 0.05. Well, 224.5 goes underneath 0.05 goes here. And again, I'm moving it 2 spaces over because it just makes it a little bit easier. And if you notice, I can't move it 2 spaces over here. I can only move it 1. So I have to go ahead and annex another 0 because I've got to move it 2 spaces over. It's just part of the rules. If you multiply this by 10, you multiply that by 10. Otherwise, you'll end up with an answer that's inaccurate. And so I put the decimal point right up there. Now I've got it anchored in the right place. And I rewrite the problem. 5. How many times does 5 go into 2, 2, 4, 5, 0? Remember the decimal point is there, so I can put that right up there. So how many times does 5 go into 2? 0. How many times does 5 go into 22? Goes in 4 times, because 4 times 5 is going to be 20. So I bring down the 4. And I see again that I'm going to need that 4 again. 4 times 5 is going to be 20. I subtract. Now I've got to bring down that 5. 5 goes into 45 how many times? If I know my multiplication tables, I know it's 9. I have nothing left over, which is cool. So now I've just got to figure out, well, I got to bring down this last 0. Didn't like that arrow. This last 0. And how many times does 5 go into 0? It goes in 0 times. So my answer for this is going to be 4, 4, 9, 0. And I see if that looks reasonable. I see this is about 225. And this number here, I don't really know what to do with estimating that. I just know that it's a pretty small number. So it would make sense that I would end up being able to put a bunch of these, lots and lots of these, into here. So if you wanted to do it that way, you could, or you could just go ahead and say, well, this is small, this is big, so I'm going to end up with a big number here, and that makes perfect sense, and then we are done.